Senator Sherrod Brown announced Thursday he will not launch a presidential bid. In a surprise announcement, Brown took his name out of the running, but vowed to help Democrats retake the White House, adding, "The best place for me to make that fight is in the United States Senate." During the midterms, Brown was the only major Democrat to win a seat in Ohio. Supporters touted Brown's success in the battleground state, arguing the senator could have had broad appeal in 2020. To discuss, let's bring in Dave Weigel. He's a national political correspondent for The Washington Post and author of the newsletter The Trailer. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. I know you've reported extensively on this. Now that Senator Brown has made his decision, who does this help?
Well, I think it most immediately helps Senator Bernie Sanders. That's not what I've seen in a lot of quick reactions to Brown's decision, because there was an idea that Brown voters were people who just wanted an electable candidate. But Sanders people looked at Brown as the clearest threat to voters who voted for him because he was a pro-labor populist. Brown had very good ties, probably stronger ties than Sanders does, to a lot of unions, especially building trades. And there's kind of an ongoing, very long-lasting fight over those endorsements. So it helps Sanders on the margins. I think that's the only person who clearly benefited today, because we don't really know who the Sherrod Brown voter was, apart from people who wanted a voice in there from the Midwest, and they actually have a couple other choices.
So you write this, that Senator Brown was encouraged to hear, quote, several rival candidates adopt his dignity of work motto on the trail. So how does Brown define that motto, and how is it becoming significant for other Democrats?
Well, it's a good question, because he really did enter the race the way that we sometimes discuss somebody trying to make a point or send a message. That really was what it turned out Brown was doing. He explored this thing for about 6 weeks, started in Ohio, did 4 early states, and his warning was that if Democrats got too invested in talking about what government could do for people, they were getting away from why people voted for the Democratic Party, even if they didn't feel like they were the types who wanted handouts or anything free. It was that they wanted to be able to have a job that covered most of their livelihood, that let them be able to be starting a family, afford a middle-class lifestyle, and if they needed some help on the margins, then Democrats would provide that. So it's a very specific kind of Democratic message that was a path away from the idea, and you could say it's fair or unfair, that what America needs is a kind of social democratic welfare state. There was this, Brown was a little bit worried people were not talking enough about that.
Well, Senator Brown joins a growing group of Democrats who also announced this week they will not seek the nomination. This includes former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg and Senator Jeff Merkley. Are we seeing any kind of patterns emerging here?
Well, we've seen a lot of white guys, frankly, jump out of the race, although Eric Holder, who was not seen as a particularly serious candidate, he didn't make the early state interviews and hires that Merkley or Brown did, that he also jumped out. No, I think we've seen especially from Bloomberg, a sense that there are a lot of people representing different lanes of the party, and it is not in your interest if you're Bloomberg and you're a bit more of a centrist, it's not in your interest to split that vote and spend a lot of money splitting that vote, because you think the party's in better shape if it ends up with a Joe Biden nomination or an Amy Klobuchar nomination, just to name 2 people who've set that lane up. Or I think in Bloomberg's perspective too, Jay Inslee getting in with money behind him, running on a climate message, that exactly lines up with Bloomberg's own priorities. So he saw a couple people doing this and didn't see much of a path for himself. And frankly, it takes a little bit of realism and ego checking to do these visits to early states, have a couple small crowds and say it's not going to happen for me.
Yeah, ego checking is right. Well, in the latest edition of your newsletter, The Trailer, you write, Democrats aren't worried about electability this campaign cycle. What do you mean by that?
Well, we've gone through a couple cycles here. I would say 2004 for the Democrats was a good one. 2000 for Republicans, where there was a real worry that the party did not have what it took to win a majority. And that's not what we have here. We have a Democratic Party that, kind of like the Republicans of 2016, thinks that it has a map to the electoral majority, thinks that it has in polling at least, a clear advantage over an unpopular Republican nominee. Every poll we've seen, the president is exactly where presidents who've lost re-election have been in the low 40s and the high 30s. So you're not seeing the same sort of conversation where Democrats believe they have to settle for somebody. You do hear it at some levels, and there have been polls and focus groups where people who don't know much about the candidates are ready to settle for someone like Biden just because they get the sense he's electable. But you don't see the same panic that you saw in 2004, a not very well remembered primary, but where the entire Democratic debate was whether they could put up with Howard Dean or whether he'd throw the election to George W. Bush. There's just a little bit more confidence among Democrats now, I think, because they did so well in the Midwest in 2018.
All right, such a different atmosphere now. Dave Weigel. Dave, thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up,